This is the Fire 103 Case Study Group Project on the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Group members include Brock J., Colin P., Eric S., Peyton P., and Michaela C. The Triangle Shirtwaist incident took place in a wealthy neighborhood in Manhattan, in what was called the Ash Building, the 8th through 10th floors of which housed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, within which over 600 women labored in making waist shirts, the equivalent of blouses today, getting paid minuscule wages of $15 a week for long 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Majority of the workers were young immigrant women, most of which non-English speakers, working along long rows of sewing machines and tables day in and day out. During this time, workers' unions were beginning to become more prevalent, leading to many of these women trying to organize into a labor union with other factories in order to push for higher wages and better working conditions. These efforts were met with opposition from the factory owners Max Blanc and Isaac Harris. Despite the owners receiving previous reprimands for the working environment they'd created, with doors being locked to keep the employees from leaving or taking breaks, and hiring thugs to police the employees, nothing had condemned the factory itself at the time, so it continued to keep producing. Workers continued to work in the unsafe and harsh conditions when the fire itself broke out on March 25th of 1911. The fire lasted only 18 minutes, but quickly took the contents of the factory, including the 146 lives out of some 500 workers that were within it. Point of origin is unknown, most speculated back to a bin containing cotton straps started by a discarded cigarette into the easily lighted, highly combustible fuels of a rag bin. Accounts mention the manager attempting to use a fire hose early on in the building to extinguish the flames, but ultimately failed between the rotted hose itself and the valve for it being rusted shut. Panic quickly ensued for the workers within. The women working within rushed for the exits as the fire began to spread. There was only one fire escape which was too narrow for a large egress. Even such, the escape itself collapsed under the weight of the numbers who made it onto the quote-unquote escape. Elevators were tried for an exit strategy, however, out of the 4 in the building, only one was operational. It fit only 12 people at a time, and after 4 trips was damaged beyond serviceable repair by the fire. The roof was accessed by some of the higher floors, where some of the women were successful in escaping to adjoining buildings, for others trying to make it to the 2 known stairwells, unfortunately. Only one of the 2 were open, one being locked to deter theft by the owners. The open one consisted of an inward opening door that became quickly jammed with the number of people trying to rush out of it. With options running out, some women began to jump out of the windows as a last-ditch attempt to escape the flames, a majority of which fell to their deaths upon the pavement below. At this point the fire department was ill-prepared for fighting fires in high-rise buildings, and could only reach up to the 7th floor, 1 floor short of where the fire was actively rampaging. In addition to the bodies falling from the factory on fire hoses below, firefighting efforts were compromised to say the least. Here you can get a picture of how the 3 floors of the Ash Building that made up the factory were laid out, with a locked stairwell occupying the Washington Place side, as well as the Green Street staircase, of which inward opening doors to which were quickly overwhelmed. This shows a more aerial view of the 10th floor, which was more of the operations floor. Buildings of over 10,000 square feet were required to have 3 sets of stairs for egress. However, the accounts only ever mentioned 2 being significant to the workers, with 1 being locked already. Egress was further hindered by long rows of tables and chairs. Additionally, as is the case for many fire tragedies, there was no functional alarm system installed to the building. This is a rehashing of the major contributing factors we've gone over thus far. Something to note if one has never been into a workshop dealing with fabrics and textiles is the amount of combustibles really present. Fabrics were, and today, are packaged often in large cardboard boxes for transportation and storage. They also often have an oil-type coating or factor built into them when they're new to protect from damages before being sold. Working in theater costume shops previously, many of the crowded workspaces with wall-to-wall tables blocking exits are still in place today despite strict regulations that larger fabric and textile working companies are forced to follow today. These are all majorly combustible materials that owners are generally aware of the need for better protection and suppression systems to control. At the time, however, protection and suppression systems weren't regulated the same way, so many factors that are laws today were not around back then. Accounts mention that this fire started around 4:30 and was reduced to mop-up and mostly damage control for the population around it by 5 o'clock. The building was called fireproof by the company before this, and with no sprinkler systems, locked escape routes, and the hose malfunctions mentioned earlier, it was apparent now that while the building itself may in fact still be standing after the fire passed, that people were still not fireproof and needed to be protected. This fire was a major influence to two pieces of legislation that make up some of the laws of fire protection and suppression systems we have today. The first being the Sullivan-Hoey Fire Prevention Law. Serving as a model for state and national workplace safety laws, this law required factory owners to install sprinkler systems, establish a New York City Fire Prevention Bureau, and expand the powers of the Fire Commissioner. NFPA 101 would not be established until later on, with other fires contributing to it as well. It established the rule for outward opening exit doors to stairwells with 2-hour fireproof walls, requiring that they be unlocked and clear of obstructions and decorations. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire tragedy put forth a lot that would go on to influence the way that we view protection and suppression systems today. It also made great emphasis on what we see a lot in our textbooks now, of the importance of proper maintenance on these systems. Without being properly maintained and inspected, none of the systems with which we put in place can actually be useful to the general population. And this concludes our group project. This is our work cited on this page as well as on the next page down. Thank you for your time.